Oh, okay.
Ready? 2, 1, speed. Okay, and you were starting with your dad's birthday, I think.
Yeah, that's the day we left for California. I think it was his 56th birthday. Yeah, we started west on Highway 40, and Dad's older brother, Charlie, had a ranch down on Big Gulch. And just as we were approaching that, same thing, well, we thought it was the same thing happened again. Here come the steam and the water back over the windshield. So we thought it was froze up again, and we pulled in Uncle Charlie's place there and heated water and poured it over everything we could find. Thought we probably had it for thawed out, and started to fill the radiator and pouring water in the radiator, and we hear it running out on the ground. So got to looking some more, and the heater hose had come off of the radiator. He hadn't got it fastened on good, and it come loose, and that's what caused the problem that time. So after we found that, I took a screwdriver and put it back on, tightened it up, and thought it was all right. We headed on down the road, and we just coming into Provo, Utah, going down that Daniels Canyon, and we could see the town ahead of us. Here the same thing happened again. So right on the left-hand side of the road, about the first thing we saw when we come into town was a garage. There's a man standing out there, and he was shutting down his gas pumps, and he already had the building locked. And we pulled in and told him what the problem was. He said, well, he said, I'll fix it for you. So he did. We were planning to get to Salt Lake that night. Well, after he got it fixed, we headed on over the mountain to Salt Lake and got into Salt Lake about 10 o'clock at night. After Dad's brother John lived, and his family lived there, and we stayed with them that night. The next day we got up and left and got as far as Winnebago, Nevada that night, and found a motel, and it had one bed in it, and they put a cot in there for my dad to sleep on, and Gloria and I slept in the bed. But there's no good place for the kids to sleep. So we had Pete in a basket, so he could manage there, but we didn't know what else to do, so we pulled a couple of dresser drawers out and made them beds in the dresser drawers. Well, Doris and Pete didn't like that one little bit, and they bawled all night long. Now, my dad ever managed to keep his mouth shut, I don't know, but he didn't say a word about it. I don't think any of us got any sleep that night. The next day, we headed out over the mountains and got into Sacramento, California, and everything was nice and pretty and green out there. We were going to go down to Lodi and stay with Gloria's sister and her husband. I'll say I never did know whether they were married or not, but they had, I think they had one little kid by then, Lloyd Showers. You knew him as Lloyd Showers. His name was actually Pippin, but we had to turn off of Highway 40 onto another road to come to it. And in those days, cars didn't have signal lights on them. You had to hand signal. And I know I stuck my hand out the window to signal a left turn. Well, some guy started to pass us just as I started to turn. He hit me on the left rear bumper and So we went on and pulled out to a place where we could get off the road. He pulled out there too, and we were talking about what we should do, and we decided we should call the police. And he said, "I'll go call them." I said, "Okay, you know how to do it, and know who to call." And so he went somewhere and didn't come back. So pretty soon we got kind of suspicious. And, well, what caused us to get suspicious was, I guess it was his boss came and, he was furious. He fired the guy right on the spot because he had come back by that time, and he fired him, and then he opened the trunk and the car and got some tubes at 3 or 4 inches in diameter and 36, 40 inches long, something like that, and took them out and beat it. Well, we knew by then that the guy hadn't called the cops, so we managed to somehow call the police. It wasn't very long till a city policeman come up on a motorcycle and wanted to know what the trouble was. And we told him, and he said, "Where's the other driver?" And we said, "Well, I'll show you where he is." And he was about a block and a half off down the road. He'd taken off after his boss had fired him, and walking down the street, the policeman told us, "Well, you just stick here for a few minutes and I'll go get him." And so he was gone a while, and he came back and he said, "I took him down to the police station and he was drunk." So I never did know what was in the tubes, but this guy's boss was furious with him. And I've always wondered if it was some kind of spy operation or something, because it was just immediately before the Second World War started. And we got that settled and went on and got down to Lodi and stayed with Gene and Herschel and Pippin. They didn't have room in the house for us, so we had to sleep in one of their migrant workers' houses, and all there was in there was mattress to sleep on. It wasn't really a very inviting place. It wasn't a Hyatt Inn, I'll tell you that. But we weren't used to much better anyway, so we got by. And then the next day, Dad and I went on to Point Richmond, where my cousin Aaron and his wife Lucille and their 2 kids were living. We found them, and we looked around a little bit for a job, and about the first thing we found out was that you didn't go ask the boss for a job. You went to the union hall and asked him for a job. Well, we eventually went to every union hall in the Bay Area, including Oakland, San Francisco, and Vallejo, and they would listen to you a little bit once, and they never did tell us how they operated. And I've figured it out since that you had to be there something like 5 o'clock in the morning, and then they assigned the carpenters to some job, and not necessarily the same job they worked on the day before. Well, we didn't know that, and we were just country people where you went and talked to people, but out there it operated completely differently. But my dad finally got a call, and he worked 2 days at a shipyard in Richmond, California. And I don't know yet what he did, but he got $44 for 2 days, Saturday and Sunday at overtime. I don't know what the base wage would have been, but it wouldn't have been very much. The union took $25 of that 44 for his union dues. And that's all I had ever called him. So we decided we'd put in our applications up at the Labor Board in Vallejo for work on Mare Island, which is a naval shipyard. So we got the applications and filled them out, and on Saturday, the 6th of December, 1942, 1941 it would have been. We took them up there and we're going to turn them in. Well, we found out that the Labor Board was closed on Saturday. And back here at that time, Saturday was the big shopping day, so we were completely surprised that they would be closed. But they worked on a 40-hour week, and so they were closed Saturday, so we went back down to Point Richmond, and Aaron had promised to take us over to San Francisco, which was a pretty big thing for a country boy. I'd never seen a big city. Well, I'd been in Denver, but it was quite an experience to think about going over to San Francisco. So, we'd gone and got Gloria by that time, and she was with us, and she and Lucille were getting the 4 kids ready to, because Aaron and Lucille had 2 and we had 2. They were getting them ready to go. And so Aaron said he had to go down to the filling station and gas up the car, and Dad and I want to go along. So we said, sure, we'd as well go along. We lived on the south side of the mountain, and we had to go down and through a tunnel and over to a filling station on the north side of the mountain to get gas. Well, I was getting gas while the news came over the radio that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. Well, where's Pearl Harbor? Well, I had read something about it, so I knew it was out in the Hawaiian Island somewhere, but just where, I didn't know. But anyway, we went ahead and he took us over to San Francisco that day, and we toured around San Francisco some. And, what was that big fancy restaurant down on the waterfront at Fisherman's Wharf? We went down there, and I think maybe we had some lunch down there. Of course, it's burned, and it's, last I heard, it was in a couple old ships that they'd anchored in there and built a new building on top of those ships. But the old Fisherman's Wharf burned after that. So that's what we did on Pearl Harbor Day.
The first one.
Huh?
The first one.
Yeah.
The original Pearl Harbor Day.
The original Pearl Harbor Day. Well, and Monday morning we drove back up to Vallejo and put our applications into Labor Board, and that was on the 8th of December, and I think it was the 12th of January before I got a job. I got a job 75 cents an hour, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. Well, of course, by that time we were about wore our welcome out with Aaron and Lucille, and I grabbed it and went to work in the boat shop in Mare Island. I think it was the 22nd of February before Dad got called. And this one morning when I got up, in the meantime I had got a house. It was government housing. Paid $37.50 a month rent, and that included all utilities. And they were doing that to get workers to come out there because our fleet had been pretty well depleted the bombing of Pearl Harbor. They were needing ships bad, so they built these wooden boats to for transport on the water from ship to shore and ship to ship and so forth. I don't know what all they used them for, but anyway, they wanted workers, so they subsidized the housing for us. So we were living there, and this one morning, Dad got up and asked me if I'd take him to the bus depot, and I said, "Well, what do you want to go to the bus depot for?" "Well, I'm going home." He got discouraged because he wasn't getting any calls. So I said, "Yeah, well, I'll take you to the bus depot," but I said, "Don't you want to go by the labor board first and see if they might have something coming up?" Well, he said, "Yeah, well, I guess you might as well," or something like that. So when he got ready to go, I took him around by the labor board, and we walked in the door, and it was a pretty good-sized building, and the guy that was the head of it was quite a ways away, and just the minute we got inside the door, he said, "I got an order in the mail for you to go to work, Mr. Van Dorn." And he, as far as I know, he hadn't seen Dad since the 8th of December till the 22nd of February. He knew him and called him by name. So he said, "I'll make you out some more papers and you can take them over and go to work tonight." So he got a job as they called them joiners, and they were carpenters, but they did most of a lot of their work was putting insulation in, glass insulation in the ships. And I don't know, they put treads on the steps, companionways they call them in ships, to keep people from slipping like these stairs are here. And they did a lot of that, but that was all just mostly scissor work and things like that. When they was doing this insulation, well, they were carpenters. They didn't know, I guess really nobody knew how to handle that insulation. It was spun glass, so they were sawing it with saws, and that glass fiber, I guess, just filled the air. And working with it, my dad would get it in his hands, those glass, little bitty pieces of glass, and they got festering in his hand. He'd have 20 or 25 of them on each hand. He'd sit there with his pocket knife for an hour, breaking those little plus pockets every night. How in the world he ever... Well, later on he did get pneumonia one time, and I've often wondered if that might have been the cause of it. But I never knew. Of course, you're on this asbestos kick nowadays. If you have ever worked around asbestos, well, you can prove I'll collect a fortune from those asbestos companies. So I'm wondering if he didn't get about the same thing from that glass, but he did live for many years after that, so I don't know. And they did various things on the ships. So after, well, it was in the spring of 1945 when I got my draft notice and had to report for the draft. And I think I had something like 6 days to report to the draft board. I didn't want to leave Gloria and the kids out there in a strange country, so we decided we'd bring them back here, and we had to dispose of a 3-bedroom household of furniture. Well, Dad had come home before that. He'd quit and come home because I guess I got the ranch paid off, and he figured they could make it on the ranch, so that left us out there. And so we broke up our 3-bedroom household of furniture and gave a bunch of it away and hired a moving van to bring it back here, or furniture back here, and it cost us $1,000 to get it all back here. We didn't pay that much for it in the first place. We'd been better off to just walked off and left it. But anyway, that's what we did. When I got on the train that night here, going to the Army, that was one of the hardest things I ever did. Gwen had been born in April of that year, so had 3 children. At that time, he didn't know whether he'd ever come back or not. So it was kind of tough times. But we did it, and I guess it worked out all right. And as I remember, we had $100 coming back from income tax we'd paid. And it was supposed to be due sometime shortly after I went into the Army, we thought. And finally it came, and Gloria thought she took it out and put it in her purse, but evidently she didn't, because she never could find it. So she figured she didn't take it out of the envelope and put the whole thing in the fire. Burned. So she reported it to the IRS, and they said, well, you'll have to wait a year, see if it shows up. So that's what we had to do. Well, I guess it was just a couple of days after I left here, I think was when Hitler killed himself. And then a couple of days later, when Germany surrendered. That part of the war was over with, but Japan hadn't given up yet, so they kept telling us we were going to have to go over to those islands and maybe an invasion of Japan itself. So I was trying to do the best I could to learn what I could to do it. So I worked pretty hard at it, but one day we was out on the firing range, and they had they had KPs, which I expect you've heard your dad talk about, Stephen. And then they had what they called table waiters, 6 of us out of the company in the dining room. But we had to get up the same time the KPs did, and I suppose we had to set the tables. And down there in Texas, they made everybody take salt tablets. We had to be sure they had a bowl about 4-inch bowl, I suppose. You had to keep that full of salt tablets and just things like that. And then after the meal, we had to mop the dining room down, and we just squeegee the water out the door. And later on it caused some problems, but that's what they required us to do. Well, in this, the 6 table waiters, we'd had a little Mexican fella, and he would not do anything. He never made his bunk. So somebody every day would make his bunk so that barracks didn't get into trouble. And he never did anything. Well, just before we got on this table waiting job, he went AWOL. Well, they finally caught him. He said, well, he went to get married, and he just didn't come back. Well, they sentenced him to 30 days hard labor. Well, the hard labor was this table waiting job. So So as soon as we got the dining room cleared up and mopped out, why we had to go and do our shaving and all that stuff, and then go out and drill with the whole company. Well, we were on the firing range, and so it wasn't too bad the first day. But then after we drilled all day and they went in and had supper and cleaned up the dining room, then they put us to doing things like peeling potatoes and things like that. And we'd get off at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, get us up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, I had made it a policy that I would write your Gloria a letter every day, and I did. I might have missed one or two, but not very many. So I'd sit up and do that, and it might be midnight before I get to bed, and then I have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, we thought we'd be on that. The usual practice was just one day at a time. Well, they made us stay on it for 3 days, working like that, and very little sleep. Second day, I got by pretty good, and we fired for a practice round, which took up a day and a half. And then in the afternoon of the second day, we started firing for a record. And the third day, we got up, did the same thing all over again, fired on the rifle range for all day. And by the evening, I was so exhausted that I just about all in is what it amounted to. And I don't know if you've ever fired on a rifle range or not, but sometimes they'll give you they call them mulligan, I think, is same as golfing, I believe it was. So if you didn't get your shots all in the minute that you had to fire 10 shots, I think, with a M1 rifle, you could take extra time. Well, come down to the last position, which happened to be a prone position. They'd let us fire with the rifles across sandbags. And so that rifle for mine was just resting on that sandbag when I was firing, and I guess I'd done pretty good up to then, and the officer in charge says, just take it easy, you've got plenty of time. If you need more time, why take it? I always like try to get my shots in time, but I did that time. I left one shot that I didn't. He said, those are all bullseyes. You got a good score. Said, when you take your mulligan, why just take it easy. And so I did, and I fired the shot. And he said, where'd it go? Well, I said, well, in the middle of the target where it belonged. They put up a bullseye marker up on the target. This officer, whoever he was, he just kind of whooped and hollered. It turned out that I tied for the best score in the battalion. It was all on the firing range those 3 days. And I won the company. Scored, what was it, 285 out of a possible 300 or something like that. Pretty good score, earned me an expert rifleman's badge anyway. So I didn't really, I don't know if I even knew about it, but on my birthday, my 30th birthday, they took the whole battalion into some building, and they awarded them, they gave each one who won the company highest score, and then company, they gave them a $10 war bond. And for the battalion, we got a $25 war bond. So they gave each of us, one fellow from another, was the regiment, I don't know. Anyway, another company had tied my score, or I tied his. So they gave us each a $25 war bond, and the camp commander, who was Major General Eagles, who had commanded the 45th Division during the Second World War, was the commander of it. And when I was out on the stage, I told him that I had belonged to the 45th Division before the war, and he got kind of excited about it. And he called me into his office after we were dismissed, and we talked about it a little while. That I had belonged to the National Guard Company here, which was a part of the 45th Division during the Second World War. So when it came time to discharge, they gave us a choice of what unit we could be discharged from. The 45th Division was headquartered at Brownsville, Texas. I told them that I had belonged to this company and I'd like to have my discharge show Company A of 157th Infantry. So they said okay, but when I got it, it was headquarters company of 157th Infantry instead of Company A, so I was happy.
Tell us your humorous version of
That was
how
what?
the war ended. Your funny version.
Oh, one I told Marsha? Well, pretty much what I told her was that after Pearl Harbor, I got this job at Mare Island building boats. We finally got enough boats made to keep the Navy afloat. So when we got that done, the Army heard that they needed help, so they hollered for help, and I answered the call and went and helped the Army out. And the next day, Hitler heard about it, so he up and committed suicide. And a couple of days later, Germany surrendered. And along the middle of the summer, Emperor Hirohito of Japan heard about it, that I was coming over there, and he up and surrendered. So that's the way I won the Second World War, single-handedly. It was every bit of it the truth, but not a word of truth in it. I didn't do that much, but I did what I was told. And we did build a lot of boats for the Navy.
Out of where were you located?
At Mare Island at Vallejo, California.
And they used to have air raid sirens?
We had several air raids. One time we went to a show in downtown Vallejo, and they had one of these air raids. Said there's enemy planes overhead. And they shut the lights off in that theater. It was a little darker than pitch dark. We sat there for an hour in the dark. They wouldn't let us out. Finally, somebody found some flashlights so they could carry on a little bit of conversation. But then one night I don't know whether Chloe and I had been to the show or not, but we were hid out in the very open somewhere, and the air raid siren sounded, and we were caught out there in the open. We didn't know, and I've heard many times since that there were enemy planes over, but I've never heard it proved. But they did send, Japanese sent little two-man submarines in. They got one up at Eureka, California. I think maybe they sunk it and then raised it and found out what it was. And there was one came into San Francisco Bay, and I guess it run up on the mud flats on the east side of the bay, and they captured it whole, and I saw it. And they were powered like a bicycle, and the guys were laying down, pedaling that way, and that's the way they were powered. But they must have had torpedoes aboard them or some deadly force. I can't remember. But speaking of air raids, when we were still living there in Lucille down on Point Richmond, it was immediately after Pearl Harbor, and they had an air raid. And they had told everybody to put blankets up over your windows so they couldn't see lights and so forth. This house we were living in had a fireplace, and we had a fire in it. And pretty quick, somebody started hollering, "Put that fire out in the fireplace. Put that fire out." We peeking out around the blankets to see who had a fire in the fireplace. Finally it dawned on us that it was us, had the fire in the fireplace. So we put out the fire. But entire harbor of Pearl Harbor or San Francisco Bay was outlined with buoys out in the water. I don't know how far, 100 feet or so out in the water. And there were lights on. They never turned those lights out. That bay was outlined in just as pretty as you'd had a map of it. Here was these lights, and all the houses around was dark. San Francisco was dark. Oakland was dark. We were dark. But there was the lights all the way around the bay. They never did turn them out.
Can you think of any reason why they wouldn't have?
Well, I imagine that it wasn't, they just left them on all the time. I suppose they didn't have any way to turn them off, is what I suppose. But it seemed to me like somehow they could cut the wire or something, because all the houses in town wouldn't have made any more difference than that did. If there'd been Japanese planes, they'd have had a perfect outline of a target. Another thing that they had out there in Vallejo around the Navy Yard was they had barrage balloons. And I can't tell you for sure how big they were, but I suppose they were 30 or 40 feet long, built like a dirigible, except they were not rigid. They were just filled with gas and then anchored. And they could run them up a mile in the air on cables. And sometimes they'd have those barrage balloons up in the air. Sometimes they'd have them down on the ground. And they did it so that they couldn't dive bomb the Navy Yard, because that was one of the things that, well, both the Germans and the Japanese had done a lot of, was dive bombing. Planes would just dive down and turn their bombs loose, and then they'd buzz up in the air before anybody could catch them. The Japanese had what they called kamikaze pilots, and they would just crash their planes into the ships. An awful lot of damage, people killed in those suicide bombers, what they were. But I've always heard that there was enemy planes over the area, but I couldn't prove that. I don't know whether they ever really knew, but if there was planes around, why they would. And they had searchlights around these barrage balloons, and I've seen them where they'd catch those planes in those searchlights. There'd be 3 or 4 searchlights, and they'd pinpoint those birds up there, and they couldn't get out of those searchlights. They could move them faster than the plane could fly. Another thing that happened out there was they had an ammunition loading place at a place called Port Chicago. It was on the south side of the estuary after the San Joaquin and Sacramento rivers came together, and it was up between Vallejo and Stockton. And I was always under the impression that it was about 40 miles away, but I'm not sure. But anyway, they were loading 2 ships. They said one was 10,000 tons and the other 20,000 tons with ammunition. And they finally admitted to 300 people they couldn't account for them. They were just blown up. Well, somehow those ships, that ammunition exploded and blew up both ships. They said there was a train load of this ammunition on the tracks where they were getting it, and they were carrying it from the train onto the ships with, I think they were all Negro people that were carrying the ammunition. And I don't know exactly what kind of ammunition it was, but I would guess it was probably bagged ammunition, because that's what they used, those big guns on the, well, I think even on the cruisers, 8-inch guns and the bigger ones on the battleships. They had it in bags, and they had some way of figuring out how much they needed to throw a shell so far. So I think that's what they had, but it exploded, and I was working that night in the boat shop, and the boat shop faced almost directly towards that Port Chicago. Well, when I saw the flashes of through the door of the boat shop, and they had great big doors on them, so they could take boatloads or trainloads of boats inside the boat shop and unload them. So they were, I would say 14 by 20 feet square doors. Well, there was 2 on the east end of that building, and they had little normal doors, household doors, to go in and out. Oh, we found one of them clear across the street after this explosion. It just tore the door off its hinges. Well, after I saw these flashes of light, I had no idea what it was, and I went back to work, and all at once I saw the walls of that building just shaking like that. The dust began flying across the building. There was a woodworking shop, and they tried to keep all the dust out of it they could, but over the years it had accumulated on those brick walls. And I wouldn't be surprised what the only thing that kept it from collapsing was the framework of the cranes they had overhead. They had one crane on each side of the building. The cranes were up probably as high as the ceiling in this room, run on tracks from one end of the building to the other, and they just go anywhere and pick up a boat with these cranes. And they had a steel frame that they held the tracks up that these cranes run on. And I suspect that maybe that's all that kept that building from collapsing, because those brick walls are just flapping like an accordion. Well, there was another door with same size that they just had rebuilt with 2 by 12 railings on them. And it was double with the how to explain it. The door part itself was in between the two railings, so that was two by 12s with boards in between, and it broke that door right smack in half of it. And one guy that I worked with had just started to come back in the building because they wouldn't let anybody smoke inside that building. He had to go out into another building with a cement floor, and that's where all the toilets and all that stuff were. And they almost required you to go out there and take a break in the first half of the shift and the second half. And he was just coming back from his break, and he had his hand on that door when that explosion hit, and it knocked him back under the trash truck they had. Didn't hurt him, luckily, but he was an old man. I don't know. I expect he was in his late 60s or 70s. And it just broke that door almost completely in half. It was still hanging together, but. And of course, as soon as all that hadn't quieted down, I began to ask around what happened. Well, somebody thought maybe it was a ship out on the waterfront, which is maybe as far as from here down to the Victory Way or somewhere like that. A little ways away. No, it couldn't be that. That'd be it had to be farther away from that. Well, if it wasn't that, maybe it was Benicia Arsenal, which was 6 miles east of Vallejo. No, that couldn't be that because it's too far away. Well, it turned out it was twice or 3 times that, maybe more than that away. But they had it over the radio calling all the ambulances in the whole area to come and try to help people. And that little town of Port Chicago was a town, I suppose, somewhere between the size of Maybelle and Hayden. It wasn't a very big town, but they said there wasn't a house left on its foundation. They were all at least moved some way from that. But and I don't know whether the ships were completely loaded, but they said there's be 30,000 tons of ammunition blew up at one, or up to that much anyway. So that made quite a bang. So that's some of the war experiences.
Did that kill anybody in town? I mean, did that kill the people in town or just the people that were loading it?
They never would tell. I never heard. I suspect there was a whole bunch more than 300, but that's what they finally admitted to. 300 of them killed.
Do you want to take a break for a minute?
Yeah, I suppose I ought to get up.
Stretch your legs.
Yeah.
Let me see who I'm.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, I'm Janet Van Doren Gerber, Perry and Gloria's daughter, and Tucker asked me to talk a little bit about my childhood and what my recollections of growing up were, and so I'll tell you a few little things. I obviously have a very pleasant and wonderful memory of my childhood and growing up. Had wonderful parents and sisters and brothers. Probably one of my earliest recollections would be one of my earliest recollections would be we lived on 895 Russell Street here in Craig. It was a house that my dad had built, and of course he had built, before he built the big house as we called it, he had built a little small house that we lived in early. And actually I never lived in that house, I lived in the bigger house, but there was a grove of trees next to our house on the north side of our house. It's kind of where the middle school is today. But anyway, for some reason, I don't know why, but we labeled that grove of trees as the little flats. And we were given permission by our parents to play in that grove of trees. And we had a lot of fun climbing and, of course, playing all the kids' games that the games that kids played back then, you know, running and chasing and playing and things like that. There was another grove of trees that was further up Fortification Creek that, for some reason, I don't know why, but we called it the Big Flats. And that was a place that we were not supposed to play, so unless we were just being particularly naughty, we didn't go there. But of course, I recall riding bicycles at what we knew then as the high school. It was the high school. Of course, my dad teaching us to ride bicycles there. We had an old horse that was kind of the family pet, I guess you would say, and his name was Old Jerry, and of course we liked to ride him around. He was very old, and so we kept him where well, that's where Taco Bell is right now, but where A&W Root Beer stand was, that was his horse pasture, and of course every now and again we got to bring him to the house on Russell Street and ride him.
It's okay, just keep going.
Oh, let's see, what else?
Start whenever.
What's that?
You can start whenever. I'll
Okay.
cut it up and stuff, don't worry. Would you ask?
Stop it. No, don't.
Yeah. Just go ahead. Just talk to me. Don't even look at the camera.
You gonna ask me some questions?
Sure. What's your earliest memory of Grandpa?
Spanking me? No, actually, I didn't get very many spankings. I don't know if my folks were tired by then, and but if I was just better behaved. But of course, I recall him, certainly working at the post office, and the post office, of course, was down on Yampa Avenue. It was a little small building, but I guess the thing that I remember most there was that he was behind bars, because that's the way they did in those days. The postal clerks were behind bars, and that scared me, of course. And then another thing that we did, which we weren't supposed to do, of course, but was occasionally he would let us ride in the mail truck with him. And of course we weren't to be seen or anything, so I had to sit down on the stairs. But remember that. Of course, going to church was always a big thing for us, and getting dressed up on Sundays, and with our little hats and gloves and pretty little dresses and suits and things. That was fun. I guess probably my earliest memory would be of him teaching us how to ride bicycles there at the old high school. I remember a couple of the kids anyway, I don't think I ever did, but getting their legs caught in the spokes, and that was always kind of traumatic. But
Here comes
Hey, John.
another nephew. What's up, Johnny? Yes, that's all right.
I'm gonna go get my stuff and drive home, okay?
Oh, you are? Just tell us again about him teaching you to ride bicycles.
can we talk about one other thing first?
Oh, yeah, please
Okay.
go ahead.
Well, I think probably my earliest recollection of anything would be one time when our folks took us camping, which they often did, And I think I was 2 and Norman was 3, so we were pretty little. But Doris was, well, Mother and Daddy took some of the other kids, I think probably Pete and Gwen, and went down to the lakeside and went fishing. And of course Doris was supposed to be watching us, and Norman and I. We were in the tent, and of course Doris was outside the tent, and Norman and I decided that we would get Daddy's razor and shave each other. And we'd seen Grandpa or Daddy do it lots of times, and so we, of course, knew what we were doing, and we got our little lather and, you know, lathered each other up, and he shaved me, I shaved him. And of course, we went outside, and of course, we were bloody from pretty much head to toe. And Doris took one look at us and just screamed bloody murder. She knew she was in trouble for one thing. And but anyway, we were cut pretty bad, but we weren't cut as bad as we could have been because we actually sharpened the razor on the edge of the suitcase. That had an old metal, you know, edge on the suitcase. And so I remember that very clearly, like it was yesterday. Let's see, I remember Daddy teaching us to ride bicycles. Yeah.
Did you get in trouble for that?
We didn't get in trouble. Doris got in trouble.
And what did Grandpa do to her?
I don't really know for sure. I don't remember that part. They say that they took us to the hospital. I don't recall that. All I recall is just pretty much, you know, lathering Norman's face, and he lathered mine, and I remember shaving, and I don't really remember the blood. I don't remember it hurting. I remember Doris screaming. But
Good. Pause for just a minute because we need to switch tapes.
okay,
Do you wear your glasses all the time?
I do, unfortunately, but I can take them off. Would you rather?
Can you see okay? Or
I can see good enough. I can see
Yeah,
good
leave
enough.
them off because they're
Okay.
reflecting the light. And that way, that'll help us not have
Okay.
to worry about this. And then, I'm going to do one more.
And then I better go back to work here in a minute.
Tape in the car?
What other tape?
The other package of tapes.
Dude, there's like 3 more packages of tapes in there. There should at least be 2 more. I thought. I'm going to do something which I think women prefer and men don't care about. Which is make sure that your lighting is
Excellent.
yeah.